Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and a certified informational privacy professional, and I help provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies. And I'm joined by...
Hi, Jody Daniels' husband here, Justin. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber hygiene, as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
We're also joined today by our dog, Basil. He may or may not say hi. But in all seriousness, this episode is brought to you by Clover Advisors. We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, and professional and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com. So what are we talking about today?
I think we're talking about how you are really dressed up today.
Yes, apparently everyone is noticing. If you're listening, you would not be able to obviously see, but go and check out our YouTube channel. Apparently, my daughter, in every video that I've had today, I'm dressed up. I suppose when you actually wear the clothes on hangers, that means you're dressed up in today's era. It's very fascinating. Everyone's like dusting off their clothes.
So let's introduce our guest today. So we have Matthew Rosenquist, who is the CISO for Eclipz, former cybersecurity strategist for Intel, and really someone who has 30 plus years of experience in security. He is on multiple advisory boards and consults globally on best practices and emerging risks to academia, business, and government. He specializes in security strategy, measuring value, developing cost-effective capabilities, and establishing organizations that deliver optimal levels of cybersecurity, privacy, ethics, and safety. And
hello, welcome. I'm excited to be here. And yes, your dress is beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it greatly. Who knew that the hanging clothes needed to get worn again? It's very exciting. Maybe I'll wear shoes next time. No, not really happening. I hate shoes. But Matthew, you did not come here today to talk about shoes and fancy clothes, but instead, we'd love to hear all about you. Tell us about how you got started on your journey and how it brought you to where you are today.
Well, it was more than 30 years ago. I was working for a company doing internal investigations for theft, fraud, embezzlement, counterfeiting, things of that sort, and really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed dealing with an intelligent adversary, or sometimes not very intelligent. But, and as I moved my career to my other passion, which was technology, I ended up joining Intel, and there became a synthesis opportunity where I had an opportunity to actually justify building the corporate security operations center. And so I took that and, built out the presentation and the recommendations, and they approved it. And then they actually slapped me onto it to manage it, where I was able to then build for Intel the first 24/7 SOC, which was great. And that just started the ball rolling. Pretty soon, shortly after that, I ended up landing our CERT process for the corporation, our emergency response process, managed security tools that protected all of the clients and whatnot within the organization, and on to the next role. And, I really, it's a hunger and a passion, and I love it. I was able to build, Intel's security capability for all of our mergers, acquisitions, divestitures, site closures, and co-locations around the world. So I've done over 120 M&A jobs. Right. And it's just on and on and on. And I got to build security from the ground up for, 1,000-person AI group and figure out what security should go into the computer chips and fun stuff like that. And throughout my career, I've had the fortune of being able to talk and work with companies, whether they're Fortune 100 or Fortune 1000, whether they're nonprofits, work with academia who are training the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, and to work with governments from across the globe in helping them understand and prepare to protect their society, their economy, their infrastructure, and their way of life from growing cyber threats. So this is my passion. I love this. I live and breathe cybersecurity.
Well, you've met your match. Look at you.
Why? So I want to kind of level set for our viewers today. As we're recording this broadcast, we're in the latter part of June, so it's crazy. It's almost half of the year is over. Yet in our world of cybersecurity and privacy, a lot has happened in the last 6 months. And as Matthew alluded to, the two of us have talked extensively about ransomware. We've had conversations about cyber risk and M&A deals. And I think what we want to focus on today is, at least from my perspective, I am starting to see a shift in the kind of questions that I get from the business leaders that I work with, security professionals that I collaborate with, like Matthew, about what has things like Colonial Pipeline, solar winds this year, the hack on the water treatment plant. What is that saying about the shift that we seem to be having in the conversation nationally, not just in our geeky cyber and privacy circles? And I kind of want to begin with that, Matthew. Tell us from your perspective, what have we seen this year, and how are you seeing the way that this threat is being perceived by the C-suite and the decision makers starting to evolve?
It's a great question. And, first we have to kind of level set and say cybersecurity never is boring, right? It never stays the same. There's always a lot of ambiguity and chaos that goes on. And as an industry, we are constantly evolving. So coming into this year, even before the year started, we saw a great amount of maturity where, because of data breach and things that's happened previously, and other incidents, there was an up-leveling of CISOs, right? Information security officers and so forth within organizations. So they had more visibility, they had greater budget, they had more influence. We had boards starting to pull them in and, get regular reports and be part of those decision-making. So, prior to the beginning of this year, an up-leveling of visibility and importance of cybersecurity leadership. So that laid a foundation for us. Now, at the beginning of the year, we saw some very, very big incidents occur that made national and international news, right? One of the biggest ones was SolarWinds, and it was really a third-party supply chain attack. Now, keep in mind, the industry back in the dark corners of where we work and talk, we've been talking about this particular threat for the better part of a decade. But again, if you don't have the visibility, it doesn't go very far. But because of this particular hack, which was spectacular, by the way, that combined with the newfound visibility of CISOs and cybersecurity in general, not only in the executive suite, but also in the public eye, that was the catalyst to really raise that conversation to go, wow, this is really, really important. This is really big. There's some ramifications. And a larger audience started to understand and grasp that. And that was important because prior to that up-leveling of communication and visibility, we've had many major incidents. But again, it didn't become a public discussion. It didn't become a discussion at the board level. So, this is a number of factors have led to a point in time where these big incidents, which were normally third page or news on the back page of the news stories, it's now becoming newsworthy and people want to know more. So yes, that third-party supply chain, again, spectacular attack. The attackers did a fantastic job, unfortunately, but it brought the issues to bear into the forefront. Since then, we've seen ransomware. Again, ransomware has been around for a couple of decades. It's not something new, but we've seen several ransomware attacks that, again, have captured the public eye, the public interest. So we're having much more discussions about it. And when people talk about it, politicians and legislators, are then in on the discussion. And now, again, that fuels it to a much higher level where people are asking, why is this happening? How do we stop it? This is really important. Oh my gosh, this is a new problem. Well, it's not really a new problem, but sure, right? And as a cybersecurity professional, it warms my heart in a sick and twisted way that even though these things are happening, at least we're bringing the conversation up, because we need to change and get people impassioned and change that willingness to have the discussion, because this is how we get things done. This is how change actually happens.
So change is really hard on any different topic. It's why large companies have entire change management functions and people to help identify what we need to do. Often with big news stories, when they make it to page one, sometimes they bubble up for a while and then they kind of fade away until the next news story comes along. I'd love if you could share a little bit about what you're hearing that's going to make these discussions different, that's going to actually make some of those small steps and the change that's necessary to help companies better prepare and better prevent the type of impact that they're feeling from these kinds of attacks.
There is a domino effect, if you will. And again, 10,000 foot level here. As you get more technology, that's digital technology that's embraced by everyday users, consumers, and companies and governments around the world, it creates tremendous value. That's why we love our tech toys, right? It creates value and enables us to do great things. But accompanying with that value, right after you get that value, there's always attackers that also want to leverage that value, take it from you, compromise it, whatnot. And so we see that start to happen. And when we experience the pain, the inconvenience, the issues, right? When our lights flicker or go out, or our water is no longer clean, or we can't get to work in the morning, something of that sort, we feel that inconvenience and pain, and that does something, right? We just generally don't like that, but it changes something in our mind. We realize we have to act. We have to change our perceptions, and more importantly, our expectations. Our expectations is our power doesn't get interrupted. Our expectations is there's always fuel at the pump. Our expectation is, yes, there needs to be food on the supermarket shelves. And so when we see something that bubbles up that starts to impact that, that's where you actually get that change. And when our expectations aren't met, well, that becomes a success criteria for the companies providing that. It's a competitive advantage as well for the companies that can versus can't. So it's all about expectation change, typically at the consumer level, and then it pushes everywhere else as that big bubble. Now, as cybersecurity issues go, if it's a one-time event, we're all kind of like okay with that, right? Things happen in life, those black swan events, those rare things. But if there is a repetition and there's a cadence and we see it again and again, it stays in our memory. It reinforces the fact that we need to change, we need to vocalize, we need to do something different and be involved. That's where you get truly fundamental change. And that's where the economics also shift. Because if it is a competitive advantage, now companies are going to move into that space. If security, privacy, and safety is something that is that they can sell or they can gain market share because their competitors aren't doing something in that space, that's where the financial incentives are. And that's where the capitalistic economy comes in and makes, in most cases, good, healthy changes to align to the consumer expectations, which are now different.
So I now want to flip the script a little bit, because this is something Matthew and I have talked about, but I'm opening this up because I want to hear what Jody has to say. And this is for the both of you. And it's this. Matthew, you and I have always debated the role that regulation and laws may play in how companies start to change behavior because they have legal requirements. And as we've seen in the last couple years, California passed the CCPA. We came really close to Florida in passing a law. They passed a privacy law in Virginia. And as we know, privacy and security are very much interrelated. But the main issue that is really creeping up in these privacy laws and what torpedoed it in Florida was the issue over a private right of action. And for our viewers, the private right of action is basically allowing individuals to sue for violations of their rights under these various laws. And obviously, companies are pushing back on that because that opens the floodgates to class action litigation. And I think it would really be interesting for our viewers to hear both you and Jody's perspective on how this will evolve, because I've heard people write articles that the Virginia thing passed with a lot of lobbying from big tech so they could say they passed it, but they shorted or they took out a lot of the teeth, i.e., private right of action. So why don't we start with Matthew, but Jody, why don't you also add your perspective on this?
So first off, let it be known, I'm not a big fan of regulations. I especially in cybersecurity, because they can't adapt and shift as fast as our industry needs it. So in general, I don't like regulations. However, there is a time and a place for them. And it's the moment where those financial incentives we've talked about aren't actually benefiting the consumer. And privacy actually is a great example of that. Many years ago, there were no privacy regulations, and companies were grabbing data of all of us and losing it, getting hacked and not telling anybody. And that was not to the benefit of the consumer, unfortunately. We gave companies plenty of time to change, to do the ethical thing, to do the secure thing, to respect privacy. And it really didn't happen because it would cost too much and there was really no financial incentive. And it actually took privacy laws to come into place to make sure that, when somebody is breached, they're actually notifying those victims, right? Little things even. So when we look at privacy is one of those areas where there needs to be regulation because the financial incentives were not properly aligned to drive companies to do the right thing. And I think as we look around the world, there's a continual tension. And we are seeing an evolution, a growth of these privacy regulations to make sure it gets better and better and better every day. Now, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Yes. Being able to personally sue or create class actions, that creates a lot of liability for the companies. And it forces a lot of responsibility that obviously that impacts their profit. So they want resistance there. But they also many companies want to show, hey, we're at least doing something. So that's kind of the evolutionary state that we're in. In California, right, the CCPA, requires companies to do a lot of things when it comes to privacy, and yet the individual person can't sue them. It's got to go through the attorney general, the state attorney general. And that was one of the trade-offs. We're probably going to see that more and more. I hope that we get to a point of maturity where privacy is a credible competitive advantage, where those financial incentives are aligned that drive companies to go above and beyond and want to showcase it, to where we can open up the laws to say, yes, individuals, if they're victimized because of the intentional or systematic policies of a company that don't respect their privacy. And in California, privacy is a right. It's the only state, right? And it undermines their rights. Yeah, they should have the ability to sue. And if it's more than one person, they should be able to create a class action. And that creates that negative tension for, penalties as part of those financial incentives. So I hope we get there, but it probably makes a little sense, at least at the beginning, not to jump to that point because it is going to cause a lot of disruption. But do we need to get there? I think we do. It's a matter of timing, and it's a matter of getting the public to support that and understanding where we are in that evolutionary cycle.
I'd agree with much of what you'd say. I think the challenge is when we look at small companies to big companies. I'm a big fan of the small company should also have to adhere to the same privacy and security safeguards as a big company. And unfortunately, the big company can withstand litigation and class action suits more than the little company. And so that I think is part of the big challenge. California has tried to put in place, and many other states where they have floors kind of in place. Well, the small company, you're technically out of scope, but that really doesn't always apply when you're a service provider and even your customers' expectations. So you're talking about financial incentives. To me, part of the financial incentive is going to be my customers. Are my customers not going to buy from me because they don't trust what I'm doing with their data? I think that's a big part of the financial incentive piece. So at the same time, I hear from companies that they won't do much because the likelihood of them hearing from an attorney general or getting a fine is really low. So if the regulation is there and the only piece that's going to be that hook is that attorney general potential fine, you're not going to see a whole lot of companies move because of the regulation. They are motivated by the risk of a class action lawsuit. They are motivated by the risk of penalties. And a few companies are motivated because I want to just do the right thing because that's what I should do. When there's a limited amount of resources, whether that be people or time or money, they have to make decisions. And when part of that pool is balanced by the threat of an increased risk that could impact their resources, then they start to think about privacy and security more. I'd agree, Matthew. I don't really love regulation. My entire company is based on helping companies comply with laws. Laws are here because companies don't do the right thing without the laws. It's why kindergartners get rules after someone broke it or did the wrong thing. Now we have to have a rule. You can't draw on the chalkboard because you drew on the chalkboard and you used a pen. So now no one gets to draw on the chalkboard, right? The rules are here because someone made a decision that was harmful to the overall environment and goal.
Yeah, I would agree with you, right? And I, let's go back to that small company. Unfortunately, many of these privacy regulations are written to where there is an exclusion, right? You have to have so many employees or handle so many records before you report a breach or things like that. And personally, I think it's absurd. The reality is, if we were talking about a safety issue, right? Okay, if you're a small car company, does that mean you don't have to put airbags and seatbelts in? No, it's for the common good.
Right.
And there's a lot of small companies out there. And in reality, that aggregation of small companies that we have holds a lot of data about us. And in many cases, it's sensitive data that we don't necessarily want shared. So, I would agree with you that these types of rules, it needs to percolate and be applicable to everybody and all sized organizations if they represent a common risk to the greater community. So, but the reality is, again, we are in the beginning steps. We don't even have unified, privacy across. Every state has a different privacy policy. It's already confusing. We're in those infant steps, unfortunately. I would like to see an acceleration of the maturity so that we can get there. And when we do, some other important fundamental blocks fall into place. For example, small companies tend not to have their own HR system or payroll system, right? They're going through a third-party service provider. And as privacy matures, guess what? Those privacy controls and regulations and everything else start percolating into those services that, guess what, the small businesses are using. So it begins to help them. And the cost of compliance for privacy and for safety and security, again, the more we implement it, it becomes ubiquitous, the lower the price, the lower the friction, and it's just expected. It is a normal part of doing business. Just as you lock your door when you leave your small company at the end of the day, you lock the door. Yeah, it's inconvenient, but yeah, I'm going to lock it because this is what we do. It should be the same exact thing when you're talking about privacy, when you're talking about security, when you're talking about safety.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I always say, can you imagine someone saying, you know what, that's okay. You can do whatever you want with my data. You're small. I'm okay with you putting it out on the dark web. I'm okay with you sharing it with the entire universe. That's fine. You're small. I get it. No one would ever say that. The small company mentality tends to be, I'm small, whatever threshold small is.
Mhm.
And the large companies say, you know what, because you're small, I still care. So if you want to
Yeah.
work with me, the big company, these are the steps you have to do. And they are generally the same. The only nuance should be the type of data that is involved, not necessarily the size of your company.
And see, this is why I wanted to have Matthew on, because he gives you this perspective. But I guess, Matthew, I want to talk a little bit about one of the things you talked about of how, we get companies to change behavior. And my best example is I view cybersecurity as the digital seatbelt of the 21st century. And what I mean by that is when I grew up, my parents got in the car. They didn't use a seatbelt, but everyone today, when you get in a car, you don't even think about it. It's just part of your routine of getting in your car. Besides putting your iPhone into the jack to get Apple CarPlay, we use our seatbelt. And why do we do that? One, we were educated that putting on your seatbelt saves lives. It was the Mothers Against Drunk Driving that really educated us. However, it wasn't just education. It was also, there's a seatbelt law in all 50 states. And so, while I enjoy Matthew's perspective and I enjoy the fact that we can disagree healthily, I think we're going to need national laws because we have a breach notification law in 50 states, plus Guam and Puerto Rico. If California and all these other states develop their own privacy laws, all of that compliance is going to deter innovation and make it more costly to do. I view this as, how does Congress going to get their act together and say, we're going to have to sit down and hammer something out, because the Biden executive orders, they're really nice words. I don't know that they're going to do all that much. Now, if Biden had teeth into the contractors who want to do business with the federal government having certain requirements and they check it, I would pay attention to that. But my thing is, from my own perspective, putting my lawyer hat on, I don't know how this changes without some really good regulations where companies know there's a real consequence if they don't mind the cyber hygiene. Because as you know better than anyone, Matthew, we are so interconnected. And much of our infrastructure is owned privately, not by the government. So the government, to a degree, without laws, cannot dictate what these companies do.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the ones who maintain our critical infrastructure. Colonial Pipeline is just but one example. And I just don't know how we get there quickly without companies starting to know, here's the consequence if you don't do, to Jody's point, what's best for the environment in first grade.
I would completely agree with everything that you said there. We do need to have more expansive regulation to make it consistent, because when you have this fracturing, it's confusing. It's difficult for companies, small and large, to maintain compliance when you've got 54 different privacy regulations just within the US, and then they also have to deal with international if they've got international customers or clients. We have to simplify it. Otherwise, it's too expensive. There's too much friction, right? We're making it hard. Why are we making following ethical privacy, guidelines and practices difficult? We should be making it easier. Right? So yes, absolutely. And I think the federal government should have a mandate to unify that at the highest standard and align that to global expectations as well. So I'm in agreement with you there. And also when it comes to making sure that there is that baseline in general in cybersecurity. You mentioned critical infrastructure. Yes, most of the critical infrastructure is run by large companies or private companies, and yet we rely on it as citizens to, again, put food on the shelves, gasoline in the stations, products in the stores, water coming into our house, sanitation, basic health and support, critical things that we need to have every day and also during emergencies. Yes, we need to have a higher level because the attackers are going after these critical infrastructures. We've seen ransomware attacks come and just, start to take these things down. And these attackers are pretty good. They're even targeting law enforcement. That's pretty ballsy to be able to go and attack a law enforcement organization, encrypt their files and go, yeah, you have to pay us. okay, normally criminals don't go after the law enforcement authorities, but when they're targeting them, yeah. So we are way behind the curve when it comes to establishing robust security that is cost effective, right? That's efficient enough to be able to be sustained, right? And that can evolve with that constant shifting that those intelligent attackers are doing. We're not dealing with just IT problems. These are smart, intelligent, highly motivated, very creative people, teams, and organizations out there that are taking advantage. And the United States is a great target. We need to get better.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these very insightful tips. And since you're so passionate in this area and obviously advise companies all day long on what they should be doing, what is your best personal cyber tip that you would offer?
And again, it's at a real high level. We have to understand who are those threat agents who are attacking us, because it's really important, and to understand their capabilities and whatnot. And when we distill it down, in most cases, most of the attackers out there, they're people. They're like you and me, right? They have an objective or a goal. Cyber criminals want personal financial gain, and that's why they do it. But they're also looking for the path of least resistance. They don't want to work hard at it. They want to get to their goal with, the least amount of effort and friction. So they tend to go after easy victims. That's number one. The other thing they tend to go after are areas of significant value. Right. So, when we look at all of this, the best practical advice is understand what's valuable to you and disproportionately protect that. Right. And the second thing is, don't be an easy target. Look at your peers around you. Do you have better security significantly, or are you kind of subpar? If you're subpar, you're a prime target. That's where the bad guys are going to go after. It's like the old adage, right? You don't have to outrun the attacking bear. You just have to outrun the person next to you. So don't be an easy target and protect your valuables. That is the core of some of the best practices that companies, large, small, individuals, apply that, and you're way ahead of the game.
So basically, if there's a bear, I'm going to run faster than you.
No.
She's already planned this out. You need to be a little worried there, Justin.
Matthew, she got it wrong. We need to be outrunning the cozy bear. And you know what I mean by that. That's the call sign for the GRU, one of the Russian hackers.
Yeah, one of the Russian designators.
The cozy bear. I don't want to get cozy with the cozy bear.
Very nice.
Well, as much as we could keep talking about this, we cannot. So I want to wrap up by asking you a question that has nothing to do with cybersecurity, which is, what does Matthew like to do for fun that isn't across the digital divide?
Well, honestly, I am so passionate about cybersecurity. This is what I do. I live and breathe this. Even on the weekends and late at night, I'm doing research and I'm exploring cyber threats and attackers and new methodologies. And to me, I am so fortunate because my career aligns with my passion. So much of my hobbies are around cybersecurity and protecting digital technology and enhancing trust and in all the toys and everything else that we all want to embrace that are coming around the corner, the next generation stuff. But outside of that, the number one thing in my life is my family. I love being a dad. Absolutely, positively love being a dad. So that's my focal point. When I do need to get away and just break for a little while, I just got my new motorcycle, so I love jumping on that and going for a ride. I live in the foothills, so it's great hitting some twisties and getting my mind off things before I get to jump back into it.
Excellent. Now, where can listeners find you if they'd like to stay in touch or learn more?
I'm active on LinkedIn. I've got a little over 190,000 followers on LinkedIn, so I publish a lot of blogs, videos, I join a lot of different conversations. So following me on LinkedIn is probably the best. The other thing is I just started a YouTube channel where I get in front of a camera and I talk about the latest industry issues and challenges and what it means from a strategic perspective. It's called Cybersecurity Insights. So if you search that on YouTube, you can find my channel. And you'll see a mix in there of me ranting about things too, because I get frustrated just like everybody else. And so I'll go off on a rant on something or whatnot. So I hear it can be entertaining. It's cathartic for me just to get all these thoughts and issues out. So if you're interested in short videos and me ranting about different things, you're welcome to join and follow the Cybersecurity Insights channel on YouTube.
Awesome. Well, we'll also make sure that we include that in the show notes. So Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your great wisdom, knowledge, the latest of what is happening in the industry with us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. I'd love to come back and do it again. There's always a new news story. There's always a new challenge. We're always changing. So yes, let's do this again.
You just need the direct telephony line to each other.
We have
ESPN. Phone. I want a bat phone.
Or, if you were neighbors, you could have the little call thing with the rope going through. I can see it. It's
no.
It's very similar.
We get along.
It'll be secure. We'll make it secure.
Indeed.
Of course you will. Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.